2 o'clock this afternoon. Good afternoon. Buenas and half a day. Audio? We're not, yes, because Senator Palacios, I know that once he sees us on, he'll be here. Audio? Yep, we will. Alpha, what audio? Okay, Ben, yours is 325. You're next. And then Ben, you're next again, 327. And then we go back up to good afternoon. Wonderful. We have a quorum. We have Senator Pangilinan, Senator Barnes, Senator Guthert, Senator Palacios, the Vice Speaker Cruz, Senator Respicio, and Senator Frank Blas. So we have a quorum. Thank you very much. The legislature in Guam is called to order. We left off yesterday. I think we finished off Bill 319, and Senator Pangilinan, you recognize on 325.
So just Marcy, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move Bill number 325 -30 COR to the third reading file.
And would you like to discuss it?
Yes.
Okay, so please continue.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 325 could be characterized as a companion bill to the earlier bill that was passed in the last legislature, which brought and updated the corporate law of Guam. Within the corporate law structure, there are standards of behavior that are expected of individuals who are placed in a position of authority through their position as a director of a corporation. And these standards of behavior govern self-dealing, govern conflicts of interest, and other business relationships between the directors of the corporation and the corporation itself. And they set the standards of behavior meant to protect the shareholders and the general public in the corporation and its dealings with each other, and of course in their operations within the business community here on Guam. When we adopted and updated the corporations law, we had in there fairly general references to the standards of behavior, the conflicts of interest, the liability limits of these directors when they are appointed to serve on these boards of these corporations. And the reason we did that was the corporation, or these conflicts of interest and standards of behavior and director liability are usually set by common law, by the different decisions that have come down over the years when these issues are litigated before the court, and they sort of become the practice of governing and determining what is acceptable behavior, what is ethical behavior, unethical behavior, and what the liability limits of these directors who serve on these corporations. But when we updated that, we had some discussion during the implementation of the Model Business Code of the new corporations law in Guam. And since we allowed existing corporations to retain their original incorporation documents as well as operations under the original corporate law, and we allowed the individuals to move into the new corporations law by opting into the new corporations law, we didn't put in these additional clarifications or additional standards that are usually part of the Model Professional Business Code. And we were going to allow the common law and the common practice to govern these behaviors of individuals serving as board of directors on these companies. So we went through the process of having roundtables, actually the Guam Bar Association, as well as the judiciary, and of course I participated in a couple of those, in which we explained through the business community and the legal profession just what is embodied in the corporations law in Guam and the relationships between existing statutes and the new statute that was enacted. And while they understood the rationale for keeping the existing liability, standards of behavior of these corporate directors, because of the updating of the corporations law and in other in the uniform practices of corporations, it was thought of that we would adopt basically the model code for these standards of behavior to be in tangent with the model code basically that we did for the updating of our corporate law, and tie the two together so that there's greater clarity going from one jurisdiction to another. In other words, if a director was serving in a Guam Corporations Board, he's serving in a corporations board in another jurisdiction that have adopted this model business code and the model professional code for the directors and setting up standards for conflicts of interest and liability. In every other jurisdiction in the country, they have been adopted in tandem so that one director serving a corporation in North Dakota, in California, he knows that he has the same responsibility to the shareholders of the corporation and the corporation itself, no matter where the corporation is domiciled. And if he came to Guam, he wouldn't know that as clearly because we continue to rely on our code that has been based on common law. So this legislation would adopt, as part of the new model, part of the new corporations law, adopt those standards of behavior set up in the model business code, model corporations code, so that we, again, give clearer structure and clear direction to the directors who serve on these boards and commissions, on the boards of directors of these corporations then that are chartered and incorporated on Guam. And it just makes corporations, their ability to operate on Guam a little bit easier, a little bit clearer, a little bit more finite, and allows even shareholders to know a clearer understanding of these conflicts of interest, standards of liability for these directors if there are part of and shareholders of these corporations that are chartered under the Model Business Code. And so that is the intent. And so it sets liability for the directors, relationships, affecting judgment when a director is held liable for acting in a certain, making certain decisions on behalf of the corporation itself, and outlines that clearly. It outlines the director's conflicting interest transactions, which define when a conflict of interest exists for a director, when he needs to recuse himself from making decisions on behalf of the corporation and its shareholders, when he is involved in any transaction between himself as an individual or as a part of another business, and the relationships being established for dealings between that other business and the corporation where he sits as a board of directors. So it defines those issues. It sets up guidance for actions that are taken and what the rights of the shareholders are, as well as what are the rights of the directors. It sets up when the director would be liable for certain actions and when he's not liable, and allows a definition and clear direction for his relationship then with the professional staff of the corporation, with the management of the corporation, and the information that he gets from the corporation, that from the officers and managers of the corporation, and the information that exchanged between himself as a director, and then making decisions on behalf of the corporation itself. So this is our continued attempt as we all look for building up the infrastructure of our community, and we talk about the water, the power, the environmental, and so forth. There's the legal infrastructure, I think, that is just as important in any economic advancement and activity here on Guam. And this is all part of our continuing effort to shore up that legal infrastructure that we have to guide and set parameters of operations and behavior for these corporations and their directors and their responsibility to the shareholders, so that we continue to protect those shareholders and they understand what their rights are. In addition, we also want to make it clearer to the directors who serve on this corporation for what kind of decisions and what kind of activity they can engage in as director of that corporation when that corporation has dealings with family members of that director, businesses in which that director has an ownership interest, and defines the limitations of action and when it would be inappropriate for him to make decisions as a director on behalf of himself as a director, the corporation itself, and the shareholders of that corporation. So I do have one amendment that I wanted to make, Madam Speaker, and that would be to add a new section to the bill, and that's been passed out. It would be a subsection B of 281-601 is added and amended to read: if the corporation or an officer or agent thereof refuses to permit an inspection sought by a stockholder or attorney or other agent acting for the stockholder pursuant to subsection A of this section, or does not reply to the demand within 10 business days after the demand has been made, the stockholder may apply to the Superior Court of Guam for an order to compel such inspection. So this is the amendment. Again, so on that amendment, Madam Speaker, before I continue, so that would be the amendment I'm proposing, to add a new section to the bill.
On the amendment, is there anyone who'd like to speak on it? Does anyone have any objections to the amendment? There being none, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, this legislation would go under the new model code, corporations code that we have. And because we continue to allow corporations that have been chartered under the old corporations law, and we want to give the opportunity for those corporations, they can opt in at any time to be under the new corporations law, which would be inclusive of this uh, uh, liability definition and guidance over the directors of that corporation. We allow them to transition and move over, opt in. Once their original charter, though, is expired, then they are automatically, if they continue to want to be chartered as an ongoing concern, then they immediately transfer into and are governed under these new code. But we'll have some corporations that may desire to remain under the old corporations law, which continue to exist, and our statutes allow them to. So by doing this, we also, I think, would give a incentive for those corporations to take a look at the existing statutes, and this addition to the new corporations law would give them greater incentive to transition themselves into these new into the new corporate law structure inclusive of this. So once again, I ask my colleagues for their support on this matter, and I think it's very important. This is work that is not headline grabbing, is not sexy, but as my good colleague from who used to sit on the bench know, this is absolutely necessary with regards to building up our legal infrastructure for economic activity here on Guam. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I ask my colleagues for their support.
Thank you very much, Senator Pangilinan, Senator Barnes, and then I have Senator Calvo. If there's anybody else, please let me know.
Madam Speaker, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of this bill number 325 as authored by the good senator from Barragata. As previously noted, I share his sentiments, and I want to say that this bill is developed substantially from the, as he noted, the Revised Model Business Corporation Act, and it's the RMBCA, and it specifically establishes standards of liability for directors and requires any party seeking to hold a director liable to establish harm to the corporation or its shareholder, and the harm was proximately caused by the director's challenged conduct. It also defines the conflicting interests and related person with respect to an interest of a director to a transaction proposed to be effected or effected. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to note that based on the testimony as done by the Director of Revenue and Taxation, he noted that a couple of amendments, minor amendments, should be made, and if the good author could work with me, page 4, line 42, the word aren't, A-R-E-N apostrophe T, should be written as
Parent, grandchild, sibling, parent, because that's a typographical. Okay, parent. Okay.
Okay.
So
And then-
So that wait. So
No.
without then any objection to that amendment, so ordered.
And then on page 5, Madam Speaker, line 34, after the word person with, and it says whim, it should be whom.
Whom? Okay, is there a person with whom? Everybody has that without any objection, so ordered.
Okay. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of this bill number 325.
Thank you very much, Senator Munoz-Barnes. Senator Calvo, on the main motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, I have no issues on the bill. Again, it's very clear what the intent of the bill is to set very clear the organization of a corporation, and in particular to the rules at which it governs itself, and its directors and its shareholders. Understanding too that as boards, as corporations are formed, and that they are, when they are formed, there is a set of rules and bylaws that are set forth from these entities. And for larger, more complex entities, again, with a myriad number of attorneys that they have at their disposal, then of course, a clear blueprint could be set for the corporation and how it deals with itself. And of course, this model business code is, again, taking from locales in the United States. I'm not against this bill, but it's an interesting, as the island moves forward in the next few years, and there's a formation of a lot of businesses and small entrepreneurs and new family businesses. For those new entities that are coming up that may not have the sophistication in regards to or an clear understanding of business and how it conducts itself from within. Just a word of caution here, and by the way, I'm for this bill. It's just that when I look at areas such as in Section 3 dealing with potential conflicts of interest, directors and shareholders, and liability of directors, I'm just hoping that in the years ahead, as we have our new entrepreneurs coming and business formation of our local people, that again they are fully aware and recognizant that in the formation of their bylaws, that if their bylaws are silent on certain matters, then the model business code will answer those questions and how that corporation conducts business within itself. And Guam, being that it is where we are, there are many businesses here that are family owned, and that there are potentially going to be these, I wouldn't want to call conflict of interest, but harmony of interest, because the shareholders are directors as well. It will be something that, again, I can't foresee the future, but it'll be interesting to see how things move forward. Again, for corporations and entities that have the sophistication and also the legal structure to create their own bylaws that are tailor-made to the makeup of their shareholders and the directors, I think this is not much of an issue. There might be an issue based on the makeup of Guam for maybe some new corporations or new individuals that seek to do business, and they are family members. And again, we need law, we need rules in place, we need clarity in areas that were formerly ambiguous or silent in nature. And this is something that I guess we're in the 21st century, got to move forward on. But you know, obviously when we move forward and we have to set clear rules for engagement for businesses, not only externally, but also internally, you know, there's going to have to be a lot of catch-up in regards to the learning curve for some of our maybe our newly formed business entities and entrepreneurs as well. But anyway, that's just a comment I wanted to make, Madam Speaker. You know, what can I say? We need to have rules set. And with that in mind, we're not this particular piece of legislation is not it's not groundbreaking. It is following precedents set in the United States. So I guess we just have to move forward, and as we move forward, whatever bumps that are in the road, we'll smooth that out when we come to them. Anyway, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have no major issues other than just some commentary on how we move forward from here. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Calvo. Are there anyone else who would like to speak on the main motion? There. So, before I call the author to close, Senator Blanche, do you have anything? Okay, so, and Senator Pangilinan, you're recognized to close then?
Sidusmasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for taking the time to look at the bill. I do want to respond to just some of the concerns that were echoed by my good colleague, the retiring speaker. And it is exactly because of, even though we're setting up model business codes or adopting certain standards of behavior based upon model business code, and he's saying, the concern that it may not be fitting with, Guam and the community and the sophistication of our local entrepreneurs and businesses, it actually helps them because it makes it very much more clear in regards to what is expected behavior. The corporation and the legal and business infrastructure and structure itself has evolved over the years. We used to have only 3 types of business operations, basically, maybe 4. We used to have the sole proprietorship, we had partnerships, we had subchapter S corporations, and we had corporations. And only those business structures were available to people who want to conduct business activity here on Guam. And we had an evolution of the type of business structure that's available that evolved not only here on Guam that we've adopted, but also, of course, coming from other jurisdictions within our country. And that includes the limited partnerships, the limited liability partnerships, limited liability corporations, and such. And all of these business structures actually, when we adopted our corporations code, made it easier and simpler so that our local people can, if they wish to provide themselves with the legal protections afforded and accorded to corporations that are duly chartered, it makes it simpler to do that. As you know, if you're for example, if you're a partnership, you may not be shielded from liability either as a partner or a manager as a partner in that corporation. If you are a corporation, then as a director, you're not shielded from the liability and the obligations of that corporation. And there are requirements, for example, that you have to have more than 3 members be a director of the corporation, even if it's a family-held corporation, or even if it's just you and your wife that want to afford yourself the protection of a corporation that is in the statutes. If you wanted to form a corporation under our old law, you have to have 3 people. So even if it's just you and your wife and you're the only ones and you want to go into a corporation, you got to bring somebody else in to sit on your board and have a 3rd person. Well, under our new business licensing and business corporations law, you can now charter a corporation with just 2 people. So if it's a family-held corporation, then it's just you and your wife. And you are now legally chartered with the protections afforded under the current statute, the new statute that we have, and you don't have to bring an outsider in to help you decide how to run your business. So actually, when we did that, we actually looked at making it easier for our local people to afford themselves the protections and the opportunities available to them as a corporation, and not limit them to going into a partnership or going into any other type of business organization by the requirements of directorships and so forth. And so this also, again, it says because we have many family members that work within these corporations that are family owned and they're run by the family, but they have other individuals, other friends and friends of the family that have helped them establish their corporations. They're not, in other words, they're not closely held. They're not completely ownership vested in a single family, like The most prominent one, of course, is Calvo's, and then you have Mark Pangilinan, and you have Ken Jones, where they're basically family-held corporations started by the family, grown by the family, operated by the family. But in some instances, the Bank of Guam, but in some instances, you bring in other people that invest in your corporations, or you enter into partnerships with other corporations, and your family takes an interest now as a partner or a shareholder in another corporation. So while we may have entities here that are closed and confined, the growth of our economy and the growth of the success of these entrepreneurs, our local entrepreneurs, have afforded them the opportunity to take interest in other operations in the community. So there is a need then to define, when you have now a closely held family corporation that's 100% owned by, let's say, a single family and its members, but they have now partnerships in a hotel that's developed, or a partnership in a distributorship that's developed, and they're not 100% owner there, but they brought in a national distributor, they chartered a local company, half is now owned by the family corporation, half is owned by 2 or 3 other people. You need then, and these people sit on board of directors. So you have a director here sitting in a closely held family corporation, sits in this new company, 50% owned by this closely held family corporation. The same director sits on that. And now you have him now sitting on this new company with other directors, and the company now is not 100% owned by the family. It's owned by other members of our community. And so you need to be clear in the standards of behavior and the liability and the ethics and the conflicts of interest of now that individual member when this corporation deals with the 100% owned family corporation. And that the person that's sitting on both boards is making the best decision. He's not making a decision now that is now going to be the best interest of this closely held family corporation, but is going to be in the best interest of that corporation in which he sits, and is now have partners and owners other than the entire 100% family. And so you need this type of protection, because we see the octopus going out on these successful local people who have grown their businesses and expanded beyond the family itself to now have partnerships and linkages with other business community. And you can't have that person making the best decision. In other words, they decide that they're going to charge, or take a management fee for sitting on the board of 50% of the profits that goes back to this company that's 100% family owned. But it's not fair to the other members there that if their ownership is only 25%, that they take 50% of profits and put it back in here, and the other people don't get any. So this type of behavior, that type of linkages and conflicts and self-dealing, quote unquote, will be defined by this law so that it protects the other owners of that new business with linkages to this existing corporations. So it actually does understand the local community, even though it's a model code and taken from the model code, but it is because as I said, this is not groundbreaking. The fact that in a single community you have, businesses dominated by a single family, the old company town, the old company store in the United States, when you had the mines, let's say, for example, where the railroad companies owned the boxcar companies, owned the construction companies that build the railroads, and then owned the store that sells them, owned the insurance company that sold insurance for the railroads, and they owned everything. And it is from that kind of activity in which, when the linkages started and they started moving out, that the need to protect those people now that are dealing with the entire spectrum of these businesses as they get separated and segregated out was built and developed over the years. So that kind of situation is what has resulted in model business codes in the other communities. And so they're the same here in terms of the successes of our people, and again, of allowing individuals to have the protection of corporations and the corporation structure for the little guy that's just starting out. And we're not requiring him now to have additional overhead and burden in terms of hiring lawyers and all that for the operation of a two-person corporation and such, but he wants to be protected and shield some of his assets and so forth in the operations of that business. So I understand fully the concerns and so forth, but I really think that this doesn't discount the unique structures of the business community here on Guam. Most especially, it accounts for the unique and structures and linkages that we have in our community between businesses that are doing business with each other and have interlocking directors and ensuring that whatever they do in the board that they sit, that we define their behavior, we define their decisions, and we guide them by the statutes so that they make the best decision for that corporation and not the other one. And so, again, I wanted to kind of give some background and clarification for that I believe this offers greater opportunities for our local entrepreneurs who are just starting out by providing and setting some clear guidelines, plus making it easier for the formations of corporations as we did earlier in the earlier bills that we've passed. And this, when that corporation grows from the husband and wife to now having partnerships with others and they continue to grow, then, and they continue to take active interest and active participation in the operations and guidance and management of other companies they have partnered up with and are now sitting on those board of directors, that we afford them the clear guidance for defining self-dealing, et cetera, so that the owners of that corporation, the general public, minority share owners are protected in the decisions that they make. So thank you very much, and once again, I certainly thank all of my colleagues for their time and deliberation on this matter. I do want to make one minor amendment, and that is just on the title, we would just strike the word out, and for other purposes. This bill is strictly with regards to adding those sections to the Model Business Code and codifying that. So there's no other purpose for this legislation. So just strike out that in the title.
So on the amendment then to strike out on the title, put a period after annotated and strike and for other purposes. Without any objections, so ordered. So on the motion then to place 325-30 in the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Senator Pangilinan, you're also recognized for 327, a substitute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I proceed in making my motion, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background. As you know, we had hearings on the bills that I'm presenting late last week, and we continued to work on these bills with the new information that we kept getting fed. And again, we were working with 3 or 4 different versions, and the version that was placed in the committee report was a unfinished version of the bill that I would like to present. And so I would like, and you're getting a copy of the bill, to accept bill number 327-30 COR as substituted on the floor, and that's being passed out.
Okay. On the motion then to accept bill number 327 without any objections, so ordered. You didn't get it yet? No, it's another one. It's the one that's being passed out. Were you able to get a copy? So the motion then is to accept Bill 327-30 as substituted on the floor. Are there any objections? No objections, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the main difference between this bill and what came out of the committee report, when we started the bill number 327, it was an act to put in the necessary language to implement what we call temperature compensation
Are you
on the
in place? Motion to place?
Oh, and I'd like to then move that Bill 327-30 COR substitute on the floor be placed in the third reading file.
Okay, so and you want to speak on it?
Yes.
So please, you may continue.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill number 327-30 is a bill that would make the necessary amendments and clarifications in law to allow for the implementation of what we call temperature compensation of the retail sale of gasoline. As you know, Madam Speaker, when we started the original bill, we wanted to implement the law, but also require the retail sale of gasoline and the retail sellers of gasoline, the gas stations basically, that they transition into a device that automatically compensates for temperature, which means that they would have to replace their existing pumps within a certain time frame, 6-month period. And as we continued discussion with RevTax and the gas companies, there is a cost associated with making that replacement, with upgrading that. And the question was it necessary to require automatic pumps that automatically compensate for temperature, or could the implementation of the law be best achieved by recalibrating the existing meters? And when we spoke with RevTax, and based upon the testimony submitted in a public hearing, RevTax and the testimony submitted indicated that the proofers and the meters are set by the pumping out from the gasoline using the pump at the gas station into what they call a proofer. And the proofer is a 5-gallon container basically that has a gauge attached to it, and when you pump the gasoline through the gauge into the proofer, that proofer is set at a certain volume, and that volume is then measured, and that's what dispenses 5 gallons worth of gas, and it calibrates that meter to then set what is in the gallon of gasoline. So if you pump 5 gallons and their pump is registering 4, then we know it's under registering, and they need to calibrate that meter until it registers 5, or that pump, until it registers 5, and when it's pumped into the proofer, 5 gallons is shown up in this gauge. And so that's how the calibration of gasoline meters and gasoline pumps takes place. Now, temperature compensation is the scientific fact that gasoline expands when it's hot. We know that the physical properties and the chemical properties of gasoline are such that it's based upon volume, so that it expands when it's hot, and therefore you get less gasoline when it's hot in terms of volume than you would if you pump that gasoline when it's colder. Now, it doesn't have to be colder or hotter. It's what is that pump set at when it's pumping in its calibration. What does it assume the temperature of the gasoline is at? That proofer you have has a device and a meter that has the API gravity plus the cubic inch level that measures then gasoline based upon a certain temperature. The old proofers, and what we used to do is when we pump it, that gauge measures that gasoline as if it was at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So as if it was 25 degrees cooler than 85 degrees outside. So because it automatically measures gasoline at 60 degrees based upon the gauge and how it's set, you get less gas because it's 85 degree gas that you're pumping. But because the gauge is set at 65, it measures it, at 60, it measures it at that. So when we implemented the temperature compensation law, we, instead of assuming that the gasoline and setting the gauge, the proofer gauge, which measures the volume of gasoline, instead of assuming that it's measured at 60 degrees as it is in other jurisdictions, except for a few, and actually more states and territories are setting the level of temperature of gasoline at a different temperature, what you have is that it is now set at 85 degrees. So if you measure gasoline pumped, assuming it's 60, you get 231 cubic inches of gasoline. And that's what the proofer sets, and that's really what the pump measures. It really doesn't measure gallons, it measures volume, but it's translated to gallon when you read it on the meter at the retail gasoline pump. So the law now says it's 85 degrees at API gravity of 50 degrees. If we were to measure it at 85, then we set the observed temperature, and that's what we term it, observed temperature at 85, and the API gravity is now at 53 instead of 50, and or 48, I think, in the old law. And so by changing the law and measuring it now with this new proofers that the Department of Revenue Tax has, which would measure the 5 gallons of gasoline based upon what's being pumped, you will now get 234.5 cubic inches of gasoline. So you would get 3.5 inches of volume, cubic inches of gasoline more per gallon by resetting and recalibrating these meters. And in the old law, we had it so that the meters are required if the pump that was dispensing it was rated at more than 25 gallons per minute. Well, all of the retail gasoline pump stations are pumps that are rated at less than 25. And so they couldn't implement the law because when we did the original law, the information we had received was that the gasoline pump stations on the retail side were the capacity was greater than 25 instead of less than 25. So the old law said greater than 25, you compensate for temperature, less than 25, you don't. This corrects it now and says the gasoline dispensing pumps on the retail side at 25 or less must also be compensated for temperature. So what does this mean, though, in terms of to the general public? It means that with the new law, when you now go buy gasoline after we recalibrate the pumps using the observed temperature of 85 degrees and using the API gravity of 53 degrees, then you would now get 234.5 cubic inches of gasoline by volume versus under the old law of 231. What does that translate? At the current price of gasoline, that translates to about 5 cents a gallon less. In other words, you were paying for gasoline, for a gallon of gasoline based upon 60 degrees, you were paying about 5 cents a gallon more than you should be based upon what you are getting. So this will ensure that you are now getting 5 cents worth of gasoline more per gallon than you would if you were under the old system. So this means the consumer now gets what he pays for based upon the new law, and that it ensures then that you actually get a Guam gallon, which is by definition here now what we get, based upon 85 degrees. So it will save the consumer 5 cents of gasoline per gallon more under the current structure than what he's paying now. So this is really a consumer-friendly act, and it makes those changes. I wanted to, and again, as I said, we just had a meeting earlier today with Revenue Tax to ensure that there were no additional glitches and all the information we have is correct so that they can implement this and start going out there and recalibrating those using the existing proofers. And so I wanted to make a couple of amendments, Madam Speaker. And the first one is to, under Section 4 of the bill on page 3, and I've passed it out. And what it does is it changes that 200 U.S. petroleum gallon means the amount of petroleum product, which occupies, instead of 231, we'd read 234.5 cubic inches exactly when the temperature is at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, or the expanded or contracted equivalent thereto, using the observed temperature, which is the 85 degrees, and the API gravity of 50 degrees, which we are saying in another amendment. So this just localizes that U.S. petroleum gallon definition to reflect the observed temperature and the observed API gravity, and then gives you the calculation of what that volume is by using those. So it'll be, that's the First Amendment that I have.
That starts on line 12, right, Speaker?
That's correct.
And it ends, so it would replace line number 12 through number 17, am I correct?
That's correct. And the
Okay.
change within that is that 234.5 and 85 degrees, and then that's the change basically in that.
Right. On that on the amendment, anybody wishing to speak on the amendment? If no one wishes, any objections? No objection. Motion carries. Please proceed, Speaker Pangilinan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the second amendment I have is on Section 5 of the bill. Section 5, Section 2301H is hereby added to Chapter 2, which sets then the I think this should be,
On page 3,
yes. And basically the change there is on line 20. It would change 50.3 to 53.1 degrees. And that is the new API gravity calculation used to arrive at the observed by calculating it using the observed temperature to arrive at 234 cubic inches, 0.5 cubic inches per gallon of gas.
on that amendment, if there are no objection, amendment carries.
Thank you
Speaker
very much,
Pangilinan.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, once again, this, when we listen to the gas companies, they tell us, you don't need to do this because it really means we're just going to pass the cost on to you. Well, if that be the case, then we want to get what we pay for. And we don't want to be shortchanged. And, they're saying let the market dictate the competition, but there is no competition. The market here is, if the guy across the street raises his price of gasoline, normal market competition says, I'm going to keep mine lower so I get more of the business. But the way these companies compete out here, especially gas companies, if the other guy raises prices, the reaction for this market is, I got to raise mine to compete with him. The normal market is price competition. If he raises his price, I'm going to lower mine so I get more of the business and make it up in volume. And that's the free market world. But on Guam, it's absolutely insanity that when a gas company on the other side of the street raises their price by 10 cents a gallon, the other company on the other side of the street says, I can't compete with that. I got to raise my price too. Because the guy just might come over here and buy my gallon because I'm cheaper. What kind of warped logic is that? So for them to tell us, don't worry, let the market take care of it, it's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. And we know from pure science that when these companies buy the gasoline from the company that is delivered the ship, they temperature compensate. Their gauges are calibrated that sets it at 85 when they take delivery. They don't set it at 60 degrees like they want us to when they give it to us. They set it at 85 because they know the science of gasoline and the chemical properties that does it. When they sell it to the military, before this law went in place, I got a receipt from a truck driver of a gas company, and it showed the delivery receipt to the commissary, to the base exchange gasoline. And it said there, gas delivered 3,500 gallons. Then it says less temperature, discount for temperature compensation. So they knew, the military knew, that when they get their gasoline, they want a discount because they're paying for gasoline based at 60, but when they sell it, it's at 85. So they knew that they wanted the price lower so that when they deliver it to the consumer and they send it out through that pump, that it equals what is the volume versus what is dispensed and what is measured. Not what the volume is, just what is measured because of the way that those pumps are calibrated. So the military was getting this break from our local gas companies, yet they did not want to give that same break to us. They would not give that break to their dealer stations. They're saying, no way. You know, you take it at 60, you pay for 60, even though the pump's going to measure that 60 temperature degree gasoline, that when you get it, you get 231, that's all you get. But when you sell it, you're selling it at 234.5. And so you get that gain of 3.5 cubic inches. And they think it's not much, but when it's over millions and millions and millions of gasoline that are sold here on Guam, it adds up. In the state of Hawaii, which went into temperature compensation several years ago, they actually estimated that the difference between what the consumers were paying for in gasoline and what they were getting was over $12 million a year. That's the difference. Well, if the Guam Energy Office had just continued to get the statistics, you know, we first did this bill when we saw that receipt, when we knew that something's wrong, that we are getting less gasoline than what those pumps are telling us. And when we got that driver who said, don't show this to anybody and don't tell him it came from me because I'll lose my job tomorrow, that showed that they were discounting to the military for temperature compensation for the expansion of gasoline. And we looked at back then that there were statistics on how many gallons of gasolines were sold here on Guam. And we could have calculated how much this 5 cents a gallon is worth. You know, and I don't know what that is because Guam Energy Office doesn't keep those statistics anymore. They don't keep the reports, and you know, we're working on something else, which if we had those reports, it'd be easy to work with these gasoline companies. But you know, there's a lack of information here. But this just makes it fair. If it's good enough for the gas companies to make sure that they get what they pay for when they take it off the ship, it should be good for the consumer to make sure that he gets what he pays for when it goes from the pump to his tank. And this will ensure that that happens, and this will save the consumer money. Or, in the long run, give him more gasoline than what he's currently paying for because he's been shortchanged for the longest time. Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Speaker Pangilinan. On the main motion, I have Senator Palacios. Anyone else wishing to speak? Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, indeed, this bill is consumer friendly, and as I sat here and listened to the presentation, it's really very interesting because I always felt as a consumer that perhaps maybe when I buy gas that I also pay for some of the air that goes into it. And indeed, in very simple terms, I think that is how I understand this to be. That this one actually now accurately put into your tank what you pay for, and not make sure that you don't pay some of the air that goes in. And indeed, considering where our location here in the tropics, usually we're at 85 degrees temperature. And to think that the gas pressure is, whatever that affects it, is actually based on the 60 degrees. I mean, there's probably never a time when Guam is at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So this indeed again is consumer friendly, and it's about time that we amend this, because now, like I said what you pay for gas is what you get, and it's supposed to be like that. And if the vendors are going to pass on the cost, that's their discretion. But at least we want to know what we're paying for and what we're getting for what we pay. And so I stand in support of this. Bills like this, Madam Speaker, should be more like this. It is to continue to strengthen, really, the protection for the consumers against faulty charges. And I would say that right now, consumers, when they go to the gas station, the charges are a little bit faulty. And so I support this bill to correct that fault. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Situs Masi, Senator Palacios. Senator Guthrie, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, this bill is very interesting because it has elicited a lot of response from the petroleum companies on Guam. I think we've all received packets of information from various companies trying to explain why this is not a good idea and why trying to measure air and how much gas accurately goes into tanks doesn't work. So this gives me more reason to support this bill. I think we need to really tighten up on our consumer protection laws on Guam. And I know Senator Pangilinan worked on something similar to this a few years ago, and he elicited a lot of responses from the petroleum companies. So I think this is a fair way to go, and it certainly won't hurt consumers. It'll help consumers, and it'll keep the petroleum companies more accountable. Thank you very much. I support the bill.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on the Pangilinan motion? If not, Senator Speaker Pangilinan, would you like to close?
Once again, Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues and for looking at this matter and giving it due consideration. I certainly ask for their support on it. I think the consumers of Guam will benefit from this, and much more the integrity of the weights and measures program here on Guam with regards to the dispensing of gasoline will be strengthened. And all we want is a fair deal. And this ensures that the deal the consumer gets is the same deal that the wholesaler gets when he gets his gasoline, that it is accounted for by the expansion of the gasoline based upon the conditions that we live here on Guam. And so, again, I ask my colleagues for their support on this measure. So this must.
On the motion to put bill number 327 in the voting file, any objections? If there's no objection, motion carries. Next on the agenda, 208. Senator Palacios. Senator Palacios, you're recognized on bill number 208.
Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 208-30 be placed on the third reading file for purpose of discussion. And if I can just give a brief overview.
The bill wasn't amended, right? It was just as introduced?
Yes, as introduced.
As introduced.
As introduced.
On that motion, please proceed.
Madam Speaker, let me just give a brief background. This legislature and the past legislature actually had dealt with this issue, and there were past attempts by this legislature to remedy what happened when two auditors that were hired by the Office of the Public Auditor about 2 years ago, then 2 years later were found to have been compensated at a level that's not properly settled, or not properly, I guess, went through the proper process, even though there's a process for the hiring of government employees above step 10. And so this Bill 208 actually is a bill identical to a bill that the 29th Guam Legislature sent down on the last day of the last term of the 29th Guam Legislature to Adelup, but it was pocket vetoed. There was no action taken, and I took it back out to actually, I thought to re-present this to this legislature. And while no one disagreed with the judgment by the court that that compensation was improperly given, at the onset, when the two employees were discussing with the public auditor for employment with the Office of the Public Auditor more than 2 years ago, it was with the understanding that the compensation at that time agreed upon would be the compensation for the position that the two auditors are to occupy. Now, we all know that when there is an offer like that, and then the acceptance of such offer for a responsibility that is tied to it, then there is an acceptance, there's a relationship leading up to that. The two auditors resigned from a job that paid the same amount that they were offered at the time, so that what enticed them to come over. They are local, so this is the time to move over. One, I think, from Hawaii, and the other one was practicing somewhere in California. And so the personal action, Madam Speaker, was cut, was signed, DOE signed it, it was formalized. There is the formal relationship that's established between the employee as employee and the government of Guam, which is the Office of the Public Auditor as the agency. And I say that this relationship has been consummated, or rather confirmed, at least 52 times, and that is that every pay period that these two employees were paid, they were paid at that level. And then 2 years later, it was discovered through some other issues. I think the legislature was drilling on some issue, and then it came across that the OPA didn't have the authority to hire above step 10. Even though there's a process, if they had gone through the Civil Service Committee, or rather the DOA, and get approval, then it would be okay. Then the step 20 of hiring would have been okay. Now, I'd like to call attention to the period of time during which this occurred. It was at the time when the Civil Service Commission was actually completely, I guess, dismantled, I would say. And so then the provision for considering compensation above step 10 and classification went down to DOA. And so it was DOA actually that handled that. I would say that DOA was inexperienced. I like to point out at this point that actually it never happened before. And in fact, even after that, it was just these two employees of the entire government of Guam who happened to be quote unquote trapped in this mess. Now, with good intentions, it's been formalized that the two employees be hired at step 20, I understand. And that is to attract them to come over. Now, this was not said, of course, the court ruled that the compensation was improper. I realize there's a law that actually can remedy that, and that the authority that authorized the improper compensation be personally liable. However, Madam Speaker, the two employees, and there are only two, one already left and working over at the University of Guam, I guess getting salary that's higher than what was hired originally when she was hired at the OPA. But they keep receiving notices from the Department of Administration that they have to pay back. I mean, I don't know under what authority, under what law. I think DOA should write to the appointing authority that authorize such hiring at that level actually to be liable. I mean, there's a law for that. And so these two employees are worried, and considering or knowing the government of Guam, probably what can happen eventually is that there probably would be a wage garnishment against these two employees. One of them, who is still at the Office of the Public Auditor, Madam Speaker, is actually, quote unquote, has to pay back the government of Guam $17,000 a year times 2, which is $34,000 minimum. And so this is not a fault of their own. And again, I agree and I accept the judgment and the decision of the court that the compensation was improper, that they have to be at step 10 at the most at that point. So that is where the problem is. And I like to say again that when the past legislature, on the last day of the term, submitted to the governor's office, it was debated at that point, and it had the vote at that point. It had the support, not excusing the impropriety, or rather the misjudgment by the appointing authority at that point, but rather the focus is to mitigate this issue so as not to burden the two employees. And I like to say that after that, of course, it never happened, and it will not happen. I understand that the authority to do compensation above step 10, I think, goes back again to the Civil Service Commission. So that's where we are. Again, this does not change the rule. This does not change the regulations. This does not excuse the fact that there was an improper compensation. But I would like Bill 208 to make sure that the burden of having to restore the pay differential that's not authorized for these employees, that it does not burden the two employees, because they were just innocent parties in this issue. And with that, I would like to ask my colleagues to consider those more mitigating circumstances. The fact that there was a commitment by a government authority to compensate at that level. There was an acceptance. The two employees left their job. They started working. They received payroll after payday, 52 times in the 24 months prior to the discovery of the improper compensation level. Those are the mitigating circumstances. And by the way, they have already been adjusted down to step 10, and one employee still remains despite the adjustment. This is still remain with the Office of the Public Auditor, but this letter from DOA is still coming back, and that is what I hope 208 will address. And I ask my colleagues for their understanding of this issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Palacios. On the motion to place Bill 208 in the voting file, I'd like to recognize Vice Speaker Cruz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in objection to this bill going down into the voting file. Mr. Speaker, this went to court, and I really don't think that this legislature should be getting into and trying to change court decisions that went through the entire litigation process. I mean, I issued, when I was legal counsel in the 29th legislature, issued a 30-page legal memorandum on this issue, which the public auditor opposed and challenged. I would be sympathetic. I mean, I understand Senator Palacios' position, and I feel bad about the employees. I would be sympathetic if this involved people that were working at solid waste who barely had a high school education. But the employees that we're dealing with here, Mr. Speaker, are employees with, some of them, more education and more advanced degrees than many of us in here. These people can quote you line and verse of statute. They issue OPA reports challenging everything that everybody else does. They issue reports and citations to departments to have 25% of their budget returned because of violations. their website isn't up, this isn't done, their reports aren't done correctly. These are not naive, ignorant people. These are educated people. They knew and should have known that what was happening was wrong. The Attorney General issued a response, and I'm concerned that it was dated October the 16th and should have been included in this committee report. The hearing was on the 6th. She issued a letter to the committee, and even if it wasn't on the 10th day that it was received by the legislature, it was before we brought this to the floor last month. The Attorney General's office letter should have been included in the committee report as opposing and having major problems with this, Mr. Speaker. Not only does she oppose it because of the fact that it is specialized legislation for one employee, but she also puts in it that the way that it's written could possibly make more problems with other agencies. It's, as she writes in her last two paragraphs, the Title IV GCA 6205.2 currently applies to all government agencies except for very few. There's no sound policy reason to exempt the OPE therefrom, especially for the sake of only one employee. The public auditor can create new positions just as every agency can. If the amount of compensation is an issue, the OPA can create new positions according to established DOA procedures and ask the legislature to fund them. The bill's stated intent may be interpreted as an invitation to all agency heads within the government of Guam to hire unclassified employees above Step 10. This would create disparities in government salaries and affect morale. For example, if an agency director could hire a management analyst in an unclassified position at above Step 10, this would evade the merit system and discourage or lower morale of other management analysts who are already employed in comparable classified positions in the same or other government of Guam agencies at lower salary rate. Based on the foregoing, Bill 208-30 LS is ambiguous and will be disruptive to and may be in violation of the merit system. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on Bill 208-30 LS. J. Patrick Mason, Assistant Attorney General. For the reasons stated in this letter, and I could make it a part of the record, Mr. Speaker, I object to this bill going to third reading.
Before you conclude, Mr. Vice Speaker, I'll entertain a motion from you to ensure that memorandum is part of the committee report for Bill 208.
Then I move that this be part of the
On that
committee
motion,
report.
if there's no objection, motion carries. Oh, Senator Spaldon?
I'm sorry,
Uh,
Mr.
I'll provide copies to everybody.
Okay, that's all
Yeah.
I wanted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excuse that.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion, 1 minute recess.
Legislature in Guahan is back to order. Let's see, I'm going to, the Vice Speaker is done with, on the floor already, so I recognize Senator Pangilinan on an amendment.
This is Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to present the following amendment that has been passed out. It should be on your desk. The amendment would replace Section 2 of the bill with what was passed out, and it would basically recognize, of course, all of the legal proceedings that have occurred and all the responsibilities that have occurred, but it would also recognize that the employees who were brought on board under those provisions and then returned to the other positions based upon the determination of the court, that, you know, at that time that they were brought on board with understanding that the individuals who were responsible for making those decisions of where they were to be placed and how they were to be compensated, they did not influence that position, that was taken by the individual making the offer. And the employee came on board, performed the work that was required of them, and did, good and competent work. And the error that results from that should not be burdened by the employee. And in this case, the burden that's being asked to be borne is that the compensation given to these employees pursuant to the offer that was made to them, pursuant to the processing of all the other individuals that had a responsibility to make sure they were doing it according to law, that if there should be any responsibility, that shouldn't fall to the employee. And that is what we're trying to cure here, because what we understand is happening is that the authorities in place are trying to recoup that difference in salary from the individual employees. And I don't think that that is what was intended in the statutes that we had passed, was that it was to stop, that those responsible account for their responsibility, and we recognize that it wasn't the employee that said, this is how I want to be compensated, and let's figure out a way to do it. It was just, they were offered, they came on board, they performed the work, they did good work, and we shouldn't ask them to pay for that because it wasn't their mistake. And so this bill would recognize that and would relieve them of that burden. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. Is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? And the amendment is to replace Section 2 on page 2 and to replace it with this amendment. 1 minute. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly rise in support of this amendment because it's consistent with what the main intent of Bill 208-30 is trying to do here. This amendment and this bill is kind of a culmination of what this legislature had to do when as a body we had to stand up to some obvious violations of the law. And the offending agency did not believe that they're in violations of any law, specifically the public auditor. And as you know, she had her attorney file an injunction so that they won't have to comply with the provisions of that Budget Act, which said that you shall not hire unclassified employees above Step 10. And if there any hiring above Step 10, then those salaries must be reduced appropriately, and as well as any violations, or if they fail to comply with that section, will result in the deappropriation of the total amount of compensation paid in violation hereof. And as the Vice Speaker pointed out, this went through court. There was a court order that ruled that the public auditor must comply with this provision of this Budget Act, and there was already appropriate remedies taken. Specifically, I believe her budget was deappropriated to the tune of like $40-some thousand. I want to say around $47,000 is what the deappropriation was made to her budget. Now, this amendment also is in line with the legislature's intent, because none of us ever wanted any of those employees to have to be personally responsible. And there are current statutes that identifies which GovGuam employees shall be responsible for any misappropriation of funds or any violations of the law. And so clearly I support the amendment. But I just want to ask for the sponsors' help. In subsection B, it says that notwithstanding any provision of law, DOA shall adjust the compensation of an unclassified employee who was hired above Step 10 before enactment hereof effective the date of this enactment. It's not really clear that what the DOA director shall adjust this salary level to. I know at the surface it seems like, well, if you go above Step 10, then you make the adjustment to Step 10, but that really doesn't say that. That's something the Attorney General has also said in their opinion surrounding Bill 208. So I'm wondering if you'll entertain an amendment that would say any adjustments resulting in any violations of this provision shall be reduced to Step 10 or something like that. but this is going forward because this is forever, right? Yeah, I know. For its point of information, those adjustments already happened. The salaries were adjusted to step 10, but this provision is perspective. It doesn't. It's not retroactive or doesn't. Maybe I could just make an motion to have the legal counsel and treat it as a technical amendment to have her be very clear that on section B, that the DOA director, if she had to make any adjustments, that the adjustments will be made to step 10. Yeah, on B, because you don't want the DOA director to have the latitude to say, well, I'm going to adjust your salary to step 1, step 4, step 5.
We're going to take a minute recess.
Madam Speaker, so the scenario we have here is when a director has to hire someone who is unclassified, they can hire that person anywhere from step 1 to step 10 of that pay scale. And in this case, this is saying that they cannot hire above step 10, and if they're caught doing so, the DOA director shall adjust the compensation accordingly. We understand this to mean that you go to the highest step from 1 or 10, but the way the language is in its current statute, and even the Attorney General has alluded this in their opinion, is that it doesn't really give the DOA director any guidance as to what they would adjust the compensation to, and we don't want to create a scenario where the DOA director is having to tell a director of another agency that they believe that that person should be step 4 or step 5. So my amendment, after consulting with our own legal counsel, after the word subsection B, line 2, after the word adjust, to insert the words to step 10. So I'll read, beginning of that sentence, notwithstanding other provision of law, the Director of Administration shall adjust to step 10 the compensation of an unclassified employee who was hired above step 10 before enactment hereof, effective date of this enactment. And so that's my amendment. Yeah. It's always been, this provisions only apply to unclassified employees.
Yeah, but according to the age.
One moment. Do you have a point of information then that you want to provide? You want to provide information? Okay, so we're going to take a moment recess.
The Attorney General's memo states that the individual, there's actually just one individual that we're trying to address here, and that individual is classified, not unclassified. Right?
Originally, they were hired as unclassified above step 10. And so the Attorney General, OPA got caught, and she had to move them into the classified service and then fit them through pursuant to the merit system. But this is just standard language to the code that says you have the discretion for unclassified employees to hire from step 1 to step 10. And then if the director hires above step 10, DOA shall make their adjustments accordingly, but it doesn't say to what step. So we're saying to step 10.
The legislature is back in session. Senator Respicia, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just my amendment to insert the words to step 10 after the word adjust.
On that amendment, are there any objections? No objections, so ordered. On the Pangilinan then amendment as amended, are there any Any objections? No objections to order. Thank you very much. On the main motion then, Senator Guthrie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I'm very hopeful that this bill and the amendment will pass. We've been dealing with this now for over a year, off and on. And in thinking about it in terms of public administration practice, I think the intentions of everyone involved were always very positive. Unfortunately, there were hiccups along the way that resulted in challenges, and rightly so. But I think what we learned from this experience is that as government managers and administrators, we have a responsibility all the time to do things the right way. Because when we don't do things the right way as government managers, there are consequences. And the consequences may redound to the clientele of government or the citizens who depend on government to deliver programs and to function appropriately. And it also can have an impact on civil servants in the government, public employees, professionals in government who depend on managers and leaders of agencies and departments to know the rules and to follow the rules, whether they are civil service rules, contract rules, and everything else associated with it. And I think that's one of the lessons in this particular bill that we can all take to heart. And I hope that our government managers out there, regardless of where you are located and what your responsibilities are, understand that your decisions have consequences. No matter how meaningful or how well-intended, if the decision is a wrong decision and it conflicts with procedural law, then accountability is required. In this case, the impact was felt by, I believe, innocent employees. And we have a responsibility in this legislature to correct that. And that's what we're trying to do today. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I support the amendment and the bill.
You're welcome, Senator Guthrie. On the motion then, well, before I do that, is there anyone else who would like to speak on the main motion? Okay, so on the motion then to send Bill 208 as amended to third reading file without any objections. So, what? Oh, there is one. Oh, that's right. I'm so sorry. Well, so you're right. He objected to the bill, but he likes the amendment. So, and he's not here. Well, let's put it this way. Since he publicly did make voiced rather an objection, I'm going to call for the vote. So all those in favor then of placing Bill 208 down to third reading file, please raise your hand. 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, more than enough votes to get it down. So it's now down to the third reading file. Thank you very much. It's 3 minutes to 5. I'd like to say that we do have, these are the bills that we have for tomorrow, 93, 269, 272, and Resolution 280. So I have 93, 269, 272, those are bills, and Resolution 280. We're doing really well. So, we did already. We finished 299, 295. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. And that's the last one, 295. Okay. It's done. It went down. since, that, yes, that was, that took, that, so, okay, so we would meet then tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. 9 a.m. What time? 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? Chamorro time? Okay, then tomorrow time, come here at 8 o'clock a.m. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.